Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Planning and Regulation Round 847. We will commence the meeting at 9:05. We welcome all committee members and visitors here today, and of course, good morning to all the city officers in the room and our support staff. Councillors, can I just check beforehand that everyone has been given a copy of the updated supplementary agenda? You should have that in hard copy on your desk. Very good. In that case, we will move straight into things. Attendance apologies. We have nil today. I have no leave of absence requests. Confirmation of the minutes of round 846. Could I have councillors that were in attendance at that one to move and second the minutes of the previous meeting? Councillor Doran seconded Councillor Fowler. All those in favour? The minutes are carried. Conflict of interest declarations. I'm not aware of any. Is there any conflicts to be raised today? Amazing. Amazing. In that case, we'll go to the starred items. So 6.1 is starred at the moment and 6.3 is starred. Do I have anyone wishing to unstar either of those items? 6.1, Councillor? Yep, no worries. So 6.1 is unstarred. 6.3, Councillor Patterson, you happy to leave it as is? Yep, no worries.
About the supplementary matter, we were issued the confidential supplementary item, and this one is called public. Is there a difference?
Madam EGM.
Yeah, yes, Councillor, through the chair, there is a difference between the confidential agenda and the public agenda. There are a couple of items that have been redacted in the public one.
Thank you very much.
Right. And is there any questions on 5.1, or can we star the forward planning schedule? Can we star 5.1, the forward planning schedule? No questions on that at all? Very good. So we'll star 5.1. So 5.1 and 6.3 remain starred. Can I have a mover for the starred items? Councillor Gates, a seconder. Councillor Fowler. All those in favour? That's the starred items dealt with. We'll move on to 6.1 for Councillor Young's questions.
Thanks, Chairman. It's a good report. I've got a few questions. I'll start with mention on page 19 of Heritage and First Nations engagement team are engaging a consultant to work with the city and registered native title claimants. I just wondered how many registered native title claimants we're aware of, please.
Through the I'll start again. Through the chair, through the chair, there is one First Nations registered claimant with the city, but through the Planning Act and the state planning policies, we are required to demonstrate that we have spoken and engaged with all First Nation parties in relation to the city.
Thank you. My next question is drawn out of concern about the state interest review and the possibility of a change of government and the ramifications of that, and I'm sure you're cognizant of that and wary of it as well. I noticed, for example, on the weekend in Victoria, the state government there's issued or they're seeking to change their legislation to remove a lot of the capabilities of citizens to oppose or make submissions about developments in a bid to give more confidence to the development in the industry and so forth. And I notice some chatter at the federal level about pressing state governments to achieve higher rates of housing. And I think there's going to be quite a bit of pressure and likely change in that area. So we've got a number of mentions in this report about the state government and... pardon me? And I just wonder if we're... Well, it's very difficult to tell. It's how long is the piece of string? How many impacts there might be from the likely or any change of state policy. What are you contemplating?
Through the Chair, in regards to changes in state policy, the state planning policy that we work through has been in place for a number of years, but what we're aware of is that the interpretation of it changes and the prioritisation of some of those state interest changes. Most recently, with the housing supply, we've seen that pop up as a little bit more of a priority for the state when looking through our amendment process. The work we're currently doing is looking at a review of our current planning scheme and how we meet or do not meet the state interests. Once we've got to a position on that, we will be working with the state government so that they can provide us more confidence about what's required to meet state interests, including changes to policy, justification papers, all those sorts of things, so that we work proactively with them through the process to resolve these matters up front prior to getting to the process of lodging the planning scheme for their consideration.
Thank you. I think there's mention here of a report coming to us mid-2025 in response to statement of or likely state interests and Minister's guidelines. So that's a fair way out.
Through the Chair, yes, we've intentionally done this so that we can use the outputs from the LGMS to guide the preparation of the statement of intent for the planning scheme. We see that as a really good opportunity to have community input early in the process of preparing a new planning scheme, which is why we have deferred the making or the request to commence a new planning scheme with the state.
Thank you. About budget, I see in section 7 there's indication that there'll be an additional request for funding above the $2 million in 24-25. What kind of measure are you looking for in addition to that, please?
Through the budget process, we are scoping out our process of technical investigations. We're also looking at what engagement activities we will be doing. So we will be putting a request that's more detailed about the financial requirements to support those activities. Due to the sort of time frames associated with this, we do know that we're going to be reliant upon a lot of consultancy services to support the city officers in preparing that information. So unfortunately, I don't have a final figure to offer you, but I can confirm that we will come forward with a more refined request for money with sort of spelt out information about what's required for technical investigations, engagement, and also support our process.
Thank you. I think that's all of my questions. I've got great faith in the process and the people leading it, and I'm happy to move the recommendation if you want to take that, Chair.
Before I accept a mover, is there any other questions of officers? Councillor Fowler first and Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I was just curious to know what time frame it would take us, do you think, to get to that Change Champions Network period? And because I realise that at that phase is there'll be a lot of key messaging provided to councillors, some training in terms of how we can really communicate this with our constituents and the opportunities that exist for them to get involved as well. Is there any preliminary key messaging that perhaps councillors, it might benefit us to have access to on where the current stage of the city plan is up to in the meantime?
Through the Chair, yes, there's a lot happening in this space in the next month or so, actually. So one of the things that we'll be providing you probably in the next few weeks is some key messaging which will accompany some of the community consultation that we'll be doing as part of the survey. Also, the results of the survey will come out with some key themes that we'll be providing you too. And then on the 1st of October, we will be launching the 15-minute, the shortened survey through Gold Coast Have Your Say, and that will be accompanied by some key messages for you to promote.
Great. Thank you, Chair. And just one, understand all that, and that's all great. It was just the now. So what happens is, for me, I'm out at community groups all the time. It's a hot topic. We're getting asked about it. What does that mean? We're saying it's starting later this year. What does that actually mean? And we get interrogated sometimes about that.
Okay. Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Fowler, we can get some key messaging on where we're at, because I think that's really important. We've been talking about it from an education in a good way perspective as well, to just say, well, this is what this means. And I think there is some miscommunications or misconceptions about where we're at in the process, because we know that the LGMS is that first stage. So that's really easy. We can do that.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just interested in understanding some thinking in relation to proposed density uplift in the new planning scheme. If in a hypothetical, what if the proposed growth in a suburb showed that the transport network collapses and can't support it? Is the theory then that we have to find a way to make the transport work, or do we then rethink those growth targets within a certain suburb?
Through you, Mr Chair, that will be part of our consideration of where we place height and density in the city. We are very fortunate as a council that we have a lot of information in terms of our transport networks, in terms of our infrastructure capacity networks, which means that we as officers can come to you to advocate for more informed decisions for your consideration. In terms of height and density, the regional plan does have a very strong narrative towards high density residential. The work that we will be doing through the LGMS is looking at how that can be planned and delivered, and if so, if it can actually be planned and delivered, and looking at what it means for our infrastructure networks, the amenity of the city, our environment, so that we come with a really informed position about how the city is proposing to manage its growth.
So is there a hierarchy of importance there? So, I mean, if we get the growth that the targets require, but, for example, the network collapses on the weight of that growth, do you then look at it from a planning strategic point and say, well, I need to pull back that growth targets because the cost of uplifting the rest of the infrastructure is too high to accommodate that? I'm just interested in the thinking from a strategic planning point of view. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you. Through the Chair, in response to that question, there is a criteria that we as strategic planners work through. It's not all based on land use assumptions. We need to make sure that it can be supported by infrastructure, the cost of infrastructure for the city and also the state, and what that means in terms of our environmental character factors as well. They are all things that we consider when we look at height and density opportunities. So it's not purely driven on a first principles approach that the site's the right size, it's in the right area for growth. Let's see how much it can take. We very much appreciate and work with the networks to make sure that everyone's making an informed decision for the city.
Councillor Doran, if you wouldn't mind, and Catherine, I think one other little bit of context that's important to that to pick up on your thinking is that the 12 months to give other sections of the organisation the chance to get their policy work lined up. So I know there's been a lot of very good meetings so far between the strategic planning area and the transport infrastructure area. That one of the problems with the current scheme was that the pieces of work were done at different times and a lot of it didn't align particularly well. So by doing updates to those infrastructure plans and the capacity plans and those networks, hopefully we'll get a better result where the land use planning and the anticipated dwelling growth or jobs growth or whatever growth it may be is actually much more closely aligned with the infrastructure requirements. And that P3M model that Michael Kaler talks about is fairly critical to that too, of the assessment of, well, yes, we could go put a bigger pipeline in, but at what cost? And does it actually correspond with the amount of dwellings that we could get out of it? But it's a good question, and one that I've been very comforted by, that every time I've had a meeting with this team, they keep making that point that all the other planning work from the other parts of council that should flow into a planning scheme and complement it, we're doing it at the same time this time.
And I think if I can, Mr Chair, it's about setting ourselves up to have that conversation with the state government too. So having that backing to be able to challenge the assumptions, particularly that are coming from the state. So that's probably something we haven't done to this detail before, which is a positive thing.
Any other questions for officers? Councillor Young.
One question. I had a meeting yesterday with a proponent for an aged care centre in Nerang, and he revealed some statistics to me which were quite astounding in terms of the demand that we are seeing and that we will expect to see for aged care facilities in the city. And so I wonder what kind of demographic analysis we're making, apart from just the big number of 1 million people. Are we closely looking at the demographic change and what that's going to mean in terms of land use impacts and provision of appropriate facilities? Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Council, in resolving the new planning scheme, resolved the preparation of a local growth management strategy. They also resolved the preparation of a housing strategy, which is a first key step in preparing a new planning scheme. The housing strategy will look at our housing demand for the city. So it will look at the demographics of the city. It will also look at what that means for different types of dwellings. So traditional houses, units, retirement facilities, the need for specialised accommodation. It will consider all those factors because they will be extremely important in preparing the LGMS, because it's also about talking about what the future of the city looks like, and that the future of the city is made of multiple parts. So we want to have that conversation with the community, but it will also guide the preparation of the planning scheme in terms of land use assumptions, where these types of uses should be located in close proximity to services and infrastructure.
Thank you. And just building from that and Councillor Doran's question, the thing that concerns me is the carrying capacity of the city. We've got a lot of pressure to accommodate a lot of people and to work to accommodate people, and that's what this entire body of work is all about. But at the end of the at some point in time in the future, systems will collapse, and whether it's road systems or environmental systems that support us or any other measure. And I wonder if we're going to identify a carrying capacity for the city whereby we can say, within the land that we have, within and being mindful of our obligations to preserve nature and have critical corridors and to have the quality of life that our community expects and so on and so forth. Is that a reasonable outcome to expect? Please.
From an officer's perspective, through the chair, from an officer's perspective, we believe that's a question that as a city we need to start looking at, is our ultimate carrying capacity in relation to population, but also making sure we have enough jobs to support that residential population. So in terms of preparing the planning scheme and the LGMS, we're required to demonstrate that we meet the shaping SEQ dwelling targets. But there's a greater question that as a city we need to start comprehending, which is there an ultimate carrying capacity for the city? What does that mean for the cost of infrastructure, for our environmental corridors, the maintenance of our infrastructure? So I can confirm that it's not part of our work, but it is forming in our mind that it's something we need to be aware of. So.
I think Councillor Young said, Alicia touched on a little bit, but while we have a lot of very good data that would help inform that argument, we don't have all the data. So big pieces of this work and the work that's being done by infrastructure and water and waste and whatnot will help inform that maybe not for the entire city in the first place, but at least be able to demonstrate in certain parts of the city that unless we did uber expensive infrastructure upgrades to support a relatively small dwelling uplift, that it doesn't stack up. So the data on that is fairly important, and there's been a big emphasis from the team put on collecting that, because just this planning scheme looks to 2046. It's not like in 2046 the population stops growing. So the network planning, which Kathy Baker's area looks 50, 60, 70 years ahead. Michael Kaler's team is taking the longer term view as well, that doing that work from those infrastructure directorates should line up with the planning scheme, and the data should complement each other. It's a pretty fair point, but in one I suspect we're all going to have to deal with a lot in the next few years at all these town hall meetings that we'll be attending. Any other questions for officers? Councillor Young, you're still happy to move it? Seconder? Councillor Gates. Councillor Young, do you wish to speak to it at all?
It's an enormous body of work that the city's undertaking, and its officers. We're very fortunate to have the capability of our people to cover a lot of territory with a great degree of skill and expertise, and as has been indicated in our discussion, there are lots of other pieces of work being done within the city, not just in the planning department, which will combine to hopefully create a really workable model for us to have confidence in for the growth of the city in the next couple of decades. Thanks, Chair.
Anyone wish to speak against? If I could just add quickly, so just one point, since I've got all the officers in the room, but I have really enjoyed seeing quite honestly, the really positive energy coming out of this team lately. Like, I know there's been a lot of chat about the amendment saga and a drawn-out process and the exhaustion from the community, but the exhaustion in our officers was even worse. So I think it's been a really noticeable thing recently, if you could pass this back on to all your teams, that I can feel a change in that narrative. Like, there's a positivity towards this is an exciting opportunity. You know, it's what strategic planners get involved for, is to help develop and plan for cities. So really enjoying it. And finally, to all councillors, you received an email possibly 2 weeks ago now with an update on LGMS and the proposed surveys that will be attached with LGMS. We are weeks away from that commencing, so if I could just encourage you, if you have more questions about LGMS, what the timeline looks like, what's going to be in the surveys, because they're quite extensive, could I really encourage you to take one of those briefings up with the team and understand what's coming out, because I believe they're excellent, and I hope that maybe after a briefing you'd better understand that too. Possibly as an action, we might resend that email out to councillors to offer them that briefing, and maybe we'll do it as a couple group briefings if that makes it easier, instead of trying to wrangle everybody together in separate. Councillor Young, do you need to close it all? In that case, we'll take the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimous. Thank you, officers. We'll move to 6.2. I see that the colour theme for officers is bone or white or ivory today. Look, did anyone dare to wear linen to my committee? It's only Councillor Taylor does that. Good morning, officers. We'll take the presentation on item 6.2, please.
Through the Chair, good morning. My name is Kira, and agenda item 6.2 relates to a proposed development permit for a material change of use for healthcare services at 206 Oxley Drive, Coombaba. The subject site has an area of 674 square metres with a frontage of 16.7 metres to Oxley Drive, a left-in, left-out state-controlled road. The subject site is located in the low-density residential zone, and the immediate locality consists of an established low and medium-density residential environment to the north, south and west. The subject site outwardly faces a state-controlled road and Pine Bridge Conservation Park to the east. Table 5.5.1 of the City Plan categorises the development as subject to impact assessment, as the proposal is not on a corner lot or a lot fronting a high-order road. A high-order road is defined in the City Plan as a road mapped as sub-arterial or distributor road. A state road does not meet this definition. The proposed development seeks to demolish an existing dwelling house on the site and build a new single-storey fit-for-purpose healthcare services building. The applicant seeks to provide a general practice service with specialised skin cancer consultation. The development provides setbacks and site cover, which complies with acceptable outcome AO1 of the low-density residential zone, and parking that complies with acceptable outcome AO1 of the Transport Code. The proposed floor plan is shown on the screen. The development includes a GFA of 211 square metres with a parking area forward of the building. Landscaping is provided to all boundaries. The plans and perspectives on the screen identify the proposed elevations and perspectives. Officers' key considerations during assessment were reflective of the City Plan benchmarks for commercial development in suburban neighbourhoods. These benchmarks anticipate commercial development where these uses are small scale, standalone, low rise and low intensity. Officers considered submissions and a pro forma letter received during the assessment of the application as well, which are discussed further on. The development layout provided in response to officers' information request included 5 consult rooms, a separate pathology and pathology waiting area, a treatment room comprising 3 beds, and a separate specialist skin consultation room. The plan that's shown on the screen is the plan that was notified during public notification. Officers had concerns with the proposed scale and intensity and have liaised with the applicant extensively throughout assessment to ensure the proposed floor plan is consistent with the small-scale nature of the use as envisioned by the City Plan. As shown on the screen, the amended proposal resulted in the removal of the pathology and associated waiting area, a reduced size of treatment room, the removal of 2 GP consult rooms, and amended configuration of the skin cancer consult room to ensure access is only provided through GP Consult 3. As a result of these changes, the development only accommodates a maximum of 3 doctors at any one time. To ensure the proposed development maintains a low-intensity development outcome, officers have recommended conditions that will self-regulate the use through operational controls which have been agreed to by the applicant, including visit to the site by appointment only and ensuring a register is maintained, a maximum of 5 staff on site at any one time, including 3 doctors, maximum of 75 patients a day, and hours of operation limited to 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Saturday, and closed Sunday and public holidays. As such, it is considered that the type and size of the healthcare services is appropriate, having regard to the City Plan benchmarks. The proposal is for a locally serving standard GP clinic rather than a full-service medical centre, which would be more suitable in established city centres or business areas where a range of healthcare services can be fulfilled. The proposed development is consistent with the intention for commercial developments in the suburban neighbourhoods. A pro forma letter was received titled Petition in Support of Healthcare Services at 206 Oxley Drive, Coombaba, which included a total of 388 signatures. The matters raised aligned with the matters raised through public notification, which have been addressed further on. During public notification, 57 properly made submissions were received, consisting of 18 objections and 39 in support. The matters raised by submitters in support of the application included compliant car parking, design response, scale, hours of operation, need, community benefit, and proximity to public transport. The matters raised by submitters in objection to the proposed development included scale and amenity, zoning, location and land use character, lack of need, loss of housing, property value, and traffic impacts. Officers consider that the matters raised have been appropriately addressed and are satisfied that the proposed development complies with all relevant assessment benchmarks of the City Plan. Overall, officers are satisfied that the development is a low-intensity, low-rise development with a scale that is consistent with the established dwelling house character. The development is a small-scale, standalone commercial development that is within a residential catchment and provides a direct service which is accessible to the immediate neighbourhood. Officers recommend that this application be approved subject to conditions and in accordance with Attachment 1 of this agenda and relevant plans in Attachment 2. Are there any questions?
I regret that one. Thank you for the presentation. Questions for officers? We'll start with, had Councillor Young's hand up first and Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the briefing. The issue of higher order road is interesting to me. I would have thought that Oxley Drive is considered a higher order road, given that it is a state road and the function that it performs. So how have you come to this decision that it's not, please?
Through the Chair, the decision that it's not is essentially bound into the definition of the City Plan, which is on the screen. So as it's a state road, it's neither of the two there. So.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it wasn't a discretionary call, if you like, Councillor Young, so the scheme actually identifies what these roads are, and right. For whatever reason, state-controlled roads are not considered high order for the purposes of And again, probably just bring this back to where the issue here is, if it was on a defined higher order road, the development could have been code accessible.
That's right.
But because we're talking about how the city plan defines higher order roads, there's no discretion on whether it was code or impact. It had to be impact.
Thank you for that. The proposal still has, I think, 3 consulting rooms and an office and a reception area, and this skin cancer consultation room. There appears to be a provision for about 10 staff at any one time, and there appears to be 16 seats in the waiting room, but only 5 car parks. How are we coming to this equation, please?
Through the chair, essentially through negotiations with the applicant, we reduced the scale of the consulting rooms, or number of consulting rooms. GP Consult 3 that works in conjunction with the skin cancer consult room, so that is essentially one consultation area there.
Yep.
And then 2 further GPs in each of the consult. Would be anticipated you might have a nurse and a receptionist, and that's the scale that we consider appropriate. And whilst there might be seats, we're comfortable that the actual operations would be that number of staff required. And in the waiting room, any number of waiting chairs, we sort of can't anticipate the number of people that may come in one car, or it might be single or multiple. But I think the 18 chairs is sufficient and probably allows for people to sit anywhere through that waiting room.
I appreciate that there's been a lot of effort undertaken by officers in consultation with the applicant to try to reduce the intensity of this, but it still seems a bit overcooked to me, in the sense that we've got a provision for 3 doctors plus support staff at reception and office personnel and whatever, and I understand that there's a requirement for them to maintain records of the number of patients and their calendar appointments and all of that sort of stuff, but I just think that...
So are we coming to a question, Councillor Young?
Yeah. Sorry. It says there's a maximum of 5 staff on site at any one time, including a maximum of 3 doctors. How will we ever be able to check that?
Their development, through the chair, their development conditions, so any non-conformity to that is a development offence, and essentially complaints, it would be complaint driven, and our development compliance section would investigate any breach of conditions if it was raised.
Thank you. That's all for now.
Councillor Gates.
I just have a couple of questions from the report, if I might ask. Kira, you mentioned self-regulating. I've not seen that before. Can you explain that to me, please?
So, through the chair, self-regulating is essentially 5 staff. It will control the intensity. So we have recommending a condition of 75 patients. So really, by having the control of staff and patients, you're self-regulating the intensity of the use, and that's essentially it in a nutshell.
I don't understand. And I just have one other question from the report too, because there was that petition of over 300 signatures. Do we know where all of those petitioners resided? Have we got a list of where they came from, and where did most of the objections come from, or support?
Through the chair. So, yes, we did receive a petition with 388 signatures. Those haven't been mapped like the submissions received during public notification have. I do have the document with the pages of the petition with the addresses. My understanding is that they were mostly outside of the immediate locality.
Okay. I think it's important that we understand that when we see a petition of that many people, it's important to know who they are, where they came from and why they were petitioning in support. But anyway, thank you. That's all I have from the report.
Councillor Curtis and then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. And through you, Chair. So the city plan has some pretty definitive terms for where we can consider use changes in low density, and I'm particularly referring to dual occupancies and the requirement that occur on a corner block. How does this proposal differ in the sense that we can consider it even though it's not on a corner block?
Through the Chair, it's essentially the table of assessment for a dual occupancy. There's a locational requirement, so if it's on a corner lot or in an area with a density overlay on it. The provisions are really clear through the performance outcome of the zone code, overall outcomes of the zone code, and then the strategic framework. That's the location they occur. For a commercial development, the table of assessment states that if it's on a corner lot, it's code accessible. If not, it's impact accessible, and then the provisions don't actually have locational parameters on them. There's just some small scale standalone requirements and sort of respecting local character and amenity. So that's the core of the assessment. And as you can see on the screen, there's some land uses that aren't anticipated, and as we're not those, officers consider other benchmarks are complied with.
Thank you. Can I have a follow-up, Chair? Thanks. Just on the topic of local character, so separate from, say, other parts of the framework that we have to apply to, but local character in isolation, what would be an example of what wouldn't match the local character of a low residential area if it's been assessed that this one does?
Through you, Mr. Chair, can I refer you to page 43? So in terms of local character and amenity, basically the term standalone small-scale commercial use is applicable to that. And specific outcome 3.4.5.1.14, and I'll just read it out. It actually says neighbourhood centres element identifies that small-scale commercial uses may be appropriate in the suburban neighbourhood where they do not unduly detract from local character and amenity. And further on, it actually says standalone small-scale commercial uses, e.g. neighbourhood store, medical centres. So medical centres are actually specifically contemplated in the suburban element. And in relation to specifically your concern, it's got 5 criterion, and it talks about compatible form and scale, not detracting from local character and amenity. And from an officer perspective, what we understand about that is this is a 1-storey building. It's 211 square metres in area. It's going to operate during the daytime. And if you turn to page 41, Kira's made a comparison, and it's quite interesting that the proposed building, amended by negotiation with officers and the applicant, it's actually one of the smallest buildings in the area. So in response to your question about what is defined character, it is all of that. It's the built form and the scale of the proposal, and officers stand by it that this is now a building that is actually within the same built form character elements of the locality.
Is there an objective metric for the scale? What is small scale?
That's an interesting question, Councillor Curtis. We had one in Ashmore. It was a huge childcare centre, and we tried to. That was massive, and we said, well, this is out of scale. It's like twice the size of any dwellings in the area, and in our opinion, it wasn't small scale and standalone. So we managed to push that one back, and likewise here, we pushed this one back to what we do consider a scale. This complies with setbacks. It complies with site cover. It's only 1 storey in height. those are sort of the elements that we actually consider appropriate in relation to assessing scale.
Had Councillor Patterson next.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I've just got a question, maybe if we go back to the slide with the parking. I do feel for the doctors. I've just worked out if they're seeing 75, there's 3 doctors. If they take half an hour break, they are seeing 8.33 patients per hour between them. I'm just not quite sure how that works, and I'm wondering why the figure of 75 patients was determined. To me, that doesn't correlate to 4 car parks effectively and 1 disability car park.
Through the chair, I suppose when we look at it, 3 GPs at any one time, so you'll have 3 patients at any one time. And
I was just at the GP yesterday. There was 1 GP working, and there were minimum 5 people in the waiting room. People who'd been in waiting for some information. So I think it's possibly a little overconfident to think that if you've got 3 patients in there, you've got this efficiency of they're coming in and coming out and changing in 22 point something minutes intervals. It doesn't work like that, particularly when you've got the skin cancer consult room. There's often people waiting and then going back in again. I would like a consideration and calculation of how many patients in a day for 3 would, what does that actually equivalent to, how many are sitting in that waiting room? And my guess is you're going to have a lot more people sitting there than 4 or 5 patients at any time if they're going to meet that 75 patient target. So I wonder whether there was any discussion or whether it just makes it not viable for the applicant if that number goes down from 75 to 60 or something.
So through the chair, the applicant accepted the 75 patient cap per day. That's 25 patients per doctor, and they'll spread that out as and where required. So whilst your example might be a more intense GP clinic, this is the self-regulation or self-regulating conditions that are in place and recommended to reduce the scale of the use.
Councillor Gates and Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. I do have some other questions. Do you have a shot of I'm interested in the left in, left out, and how traffic management occurs for traffic coming from the other direction, where they have to go to turn around and get back into the centre?
Yeah, through the chair. So along Oxley Drive, heading southbound, it's about 400 metres south that a car would drive south, and there's a U-turn set of lights with a U-turn bay. Equally, a patient leaving here that wants to head south would just immediately across the road. There's a U-turn bay, so they would come out straight across. And effectively, the road is a state-controlled road, so that was referred to SARA and Department of Transport, who supported the use based on its intensity and scale.
Okay. I'm also interested in the scale of the building. Has it actually been reduced, or has it just been reworked internally to allow for the 3 doctors in the treatment room? Have they just been made larger? Is the building still the same size as originally proposed?
Through the chair, yes. So it was 268 square metres originally, and through the public notification, through the ongoing work with the applicant, it was reduced to 211 square metres. So really we saw the removal or the reduction in the treatment room, reduction of the pathology and the pathology waiting area. So that's where the changes.
So it's just that green area where there's the indent, is it?
Through the chair, no, that it is in a way, but there is also some frontage, marginal reductions at the frontage.
I guess I'm just concerned about what happens inside that building if it's a similar size. And originally there were 7 treatment rooms proposed. We've got it down to 3, but they're much bigger. I know it would become a compliance issue, but it concerns me that they still need that size building, because we've also seen frequent minor change applications once an approval goes through. So I just highlight that as a concern. Do we know how close the nearest medical centre is, please, in a properly zoned location?
Through the chair, it would be the Coomba Plaza Neighbourhood Centre. So that intersection's 400 metres, approximately 600 metres.
Okay, so the same as the U-turn. Okay, thank you. That's all I have at the moment.
Councillor Martin. Thank you, Chair. Just in terms of the local area, just wondering if in this low-density residential zone, if there's other commercial enterprises going on, be it medical or otherwise?
Through the chair, there is a commercial site. It's not operational at the moment, a little further north, just past Coomba Primary School. There's also a general practitioner in the medium density res zone just to the south of the site, about 800 metres or so from the site.
And I just had a question on the landscape plan, obviously supportive of trying to soften the frontscape, but just on page 105, there's the plan, and I noticed that the key sort of shows 3 being the sort of low size shrubs, but 4s being the large shade trees. And I just noticed those large shade trees being right on the boundary, whether that would present issues, spilling over to the neighbours, that, seeing landscaping that neighbours need to maintain. Was that the only sort of plan that we looked at, or perhaps those shade trees being in more,
Through the chair, realistically, it would be screening shrubs along that southern boundary. So the conditions recommended in the officer's recommendation requires screening shrubs around the boundaries, with the main planting being that toward the Oxley Drive street frontage to the east.
So through Chair, just to confirm though, it would be a condition of the DA though to have the shade tree planting, as I understand it. So those 4s couldn't be screening shrubs, so they'd have to have large trees planted. And I wonder if that's the appropriate layout.
Through the chair, yes, this is the plan that we're recommending to be approved, so there would be some sort of shade trees there. I guess, in my opinion, in suburbia it's not uncommon to have trees near boundaries. It's part of the character of suburbs that there are shade trees, so I'm completely okay with this plan.
Question about the trees, Councillor Patterson?
Sure is. And just going for a drive yesterday, I'm just looking at so many applications that we've approved and being so underwhelmed with the ultimate landscaping that happens. With this one, through you, Chair, why are we considering shade trees on the south border? It's the southern border, right? And so what we're doing is we're taking away the northern sun of the residents, and it's not going to provide any shade to those car parks. Why would we do that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it says shade trees, but it doesn't say large. In my opinion, they're probably going to be some tuckaroo tree, maybe 2.5, 3 metres in height, provides some sort of shade for cars, but because of the planting area, I don't envisage that they would be significantly large trees because of the actual planting area.
So through you, but what is the purpose of them then? why would we not want shade for the car parks on the other side? Is it solely to provide shade for the parking? Is that why we've requested them?
Through the chair, so condition 13 requires the development to install a minimum of 2 canopy shade trees within the frontage setback area. So that's the 2 that you can see towards Oxley Drive. Install 1 canopy shade tree in the garden bed located between the car park and the building. So that's would be number. So you can see that just immediately east of the building itself. The rest of trees are to be screening shrubs. So just to go back to what I mentioned before, is that the southern trees will realistically be hedges.
If I may, so this is my concern with what we are presented and what actually results. So, and thank you for picking it up, Councillor Martin. When it says shade tree, I'm assuming shade tree, but then you tell me it's a hedge. Then I drive past a development and I look at what's so very different to what I was expecting in our landscaping and then what we've got. So maybe it would be great to put hedging in there rather than shade tree planting.
Do you mind if I ask a couple first, Councillor Curtis? Officers, I think you might have confirmed in the presentation, but would you just confirm for me that the setbacks proposed for this building would be the acceptable setbacks if this was a house being built?
Through the chair, yeah. So all proposed setbacks comply with the acceptable outcome AO1 of the low density residential zone.
My second question was, and I couldn't find anything in city plan, but I was just interested. Does there anything in city plan, any of the framework that talks about an expectation that this kind of development was to repurpose an existing dwelling instead of demolishing and rebuilding something else? Does the city plan have any guidance on that at all?
Through the chair, no, there are no assessment benchmarks that speak to repurposing an existing residential building.
Yeah. So I think that might be something interesting in the next city plan to consider, because I'm not sure if the intent was to lose residential dwellings out of the stock. Like, I think the intent, as I read it, would have been you can repurpose an existing dwelling and possibly in the future it converts back to a house, not necessarily demolish a house, convert it to commercial and therefore lock it into that use forever. But if there's nothing in the city plan at the moment, that's going to be difficult to argue. My third question was, so while we have a condition about 3 doctors at any time, and it kind of picks up on Councillor Young's point a little bit, so and 5 staff total, but a nurse could be doing work in that treatment room, like giving immunisation that doesn't require the doctor. So was there any consideration around, while we've got a control of 5 total, you could have 3 doctors with a patient each and then a nurse giving an immunisation as 4 patients? Was that figured into the what I guess was the plan of traffic of people getting in and out of the car park?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the staff ratio was primarily based on car parking and ensuring that there was sufficient car parks for patients, because ultimately the staff will park here. So that's why we recommended a condition for maximising 5 staff at any one time. How they choose to use that is up to them. They can just have a maximum of 3 doctors. They may choose to have two nurses who can do administrative duties at the same time. There's the flexibility in there for their business practice.
So yes, Councillor Doran, there's a patient cap. My concern is that the applicant would have provided a traffic assessment saying this is how many car parks are going to have and this is how the car park is going to work. It kind of comes to the point of how many people are here at once. So if the assumption was that only 3 doctors are seeing someone at a time, therefore 3 in the consult rooms, 3 in the waiting bay, and then a changeover of cars in the car park, it would throw that out. It was just to see if that was part of the assumption that traffic looked at. That kind of brings me to the traffic question. So could we get a little bit more detail from traffic on how, so I appreciate the car parking meets the requirement, and that's based on a GFA. So if this would have been a lawyer proposing to do this, it would have been the same amount of car parks required because of GFA. How does it work in this circumstance where we know we've got a model where, as has been pointed out, if you've got patients in the consult room, patients in the waiting room, if a doctor is late by 5 minutes getting the next appointment, another patient's going to have driven in. So how is that assessed? And the second part of that is how much on-street parking is available to this in the area? Because there's no detail on that available for me.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. As you've noted, under version 9, they are area compliant. It's a rate that's based on total use area. If, for example, we were to compare this to the rate which has changed under version 10.11 of City Plan, so it takes a more kind of first principles approach. So that rate is 1 per staff member and then 2 per consult room. So the idea being you've got 1 patient in the consult room seeing the doctor and you've got the next patient in the waiting room waiting. If you looked at this development based on that, under the AO of version 9, you need 10 spaces. If you were to look at this under version 10.11, you would be at 11 spaces. So really, in terms of the assessment, we were kind of bounded to the fact that they were AO compliant. And then some, conditions have been constructed to try and, in practice, limit that parking demand.
So maybe you can answer me first. How much on-street parking is available along here?
So in terms of on-street parking, there is a curbside parking lane on Oxley Drive on this side of the road. When you look at aerial photos, it's largely underutilised. So there is parking that's not restricted by time. It's unrestricted and generally underutilised.
So back to the first point, so accepting the fact that this was lodged under version 9 and therefore it's compliant with the AO for car parking. So there's been no modelling or testing on the use to occur inside the building. It's just that's how much GFA you had, this is how many car parks you need, no other modelling or testing done. Or nothing else provided by the applicant to prove that at 75 patients with 3 doctors and this many car parks, it will work.
No, Mr. Chair.
That's all I had for traffic. Does anyone have any questions of traffic or about the road before? It's Curtis, a question about traffic and car parking.
Do you mind if I just make a comment? Okay, noting the observation that they're underutilised car parks, can I query whether that was taken during a school pickup or drop-off time, given that this development is proposed within 150 metres of a primary school?
It was just a general observation of aerial photos, so no, I haven't specifically looked at school drop-off pickup periods. Yeah.
Any other questions on traffic or car parking? Mr. Martin?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the car parking plan, so just want to clarify, page 81 has the plan. So can I just confirm that bottom left car park, it's not a car space, it's the one that, can I just confirm that's not a car park on the far left?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, that's the shared area that's associated with the car parking space for people with disabilities. Okay. So that under the Australian standard for the design of those spaces, there needs to be a shared area adjacent to the parking bay with a bollard to stop people parking in that area to assist people to get in and out of their vehicle.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. And just to follow on from that, so the PWD park, just wondering whether there was turning circles done. Just it feels like potentially if that patient spot at the above was full, that might be difficult to get in. Is that all workable?
Yeah, that was tested through you, Mr. Chair. So because you've got that shared area and you've got the bollard that's kind of set away from the parking space, it gives you more swing room, and you've got that patient patient space opposite next to the ramp, which is gives you a bit of an aisle extension beyond that parking space as well, which gives you some room to manoeuvre. So that was tested and it is functional.
And we go to the Minister for Parking.
Thank you, Chair. So a question around the swept paths, just before I get to that. Thank you for outlining how you arrived at the AO compliance. A comment before I get to it. It's hard for you because you can't taking into account when you have the same ratio for a commercial office as opposed to a medical, that there are peak periods of a medical where there'll be more people using it and then less, whereas an office is quite consistent during business hours. I think that fluctuation makes this quite difficult. But a question about why don't we ever get the car swept paths in the report? It feels like if you've got that information, that would be good for us to see, because Councillor Martin has indicated the exit of the PWD to the patient car park north of that. I'd also like to see somebody getting into patient the furthest north if the one just below that was full, and how we can utilise those.
My team do assess the geometry of the parking spaces, and so we do ask for swept paths where there's doubt. We could certainly take that on board to feed those into the committee reports for the kind of, the tighter or more difficult parking spaces in future.
Thanks.
Okay. If there's no more traffic questions, I'll let our traffic officer take a seat again. Thank you very much. So my question was back to specific outcome 3.4.5.114A. Are a type and size that will not undermine the viability of existing or new neighbourhood centres. So when I read that, my read of that is that we don't want to undermine an existing medical centre that's in the neighbourhood centre already, or any future ones. So acknowledging there may be land inside those zoned neighbourhood centres that may have a medical centre built in the future. How was this assessed, and what kind of reporting was provided by the applicant to prove that this won't be detrimental to existing medical centres or future planned medical centres in the zoned neighbourhood area?
To you, Mr. Chair, the provision is so type and size that will not undermine the viability. So, in principle, the way that officers have assessed this and reduced the scale of it, put such operational conditions on the development, that is how we've arrived at comfort that it won't be undermining the use in a neighbourhood centre where they don't have those controls. So it will operate at a far lesser scale than intended in the zone or neighbourhood centre zone.
So I can get that. I get that argument, but without some kind of professional reporting to show that. So I don't know how many medical centres are within a radius of this, and how many doctors are at each of those medical centres, how many patients they see each day, what the carrying capacity for medical needs within a radius is, which I would have thought, well, I can appreciate it says size and scale, I get that part, but how have we determined that even at 3 doctors and 75 patients, this won't be detrimental to an existing medical centre or future medical centre planned in the correct zoned area, or in the zoned area we probably anticipated this in the most?
Yeah. So to you, Mr. Chair, the applicant did provide an economic needs assessment in the assessment, throughout the assessment of the application. It did identify that there was a shortfall of medical practitioners in this immediate area. We didn't feel that, officers didn't feel the need to report on it, as took comfort in the compliance with the provisions itself. So.
Okay, so there was an economic needs analysis provided by the applicant, and it demonstrated a need, that there was a shortage of doctors in this area, in a geographical area, in a radius area, I'm guessing?
Through the Chair, yeah. So it was in the Coomera, essentially west of Oxley Drive, for that whole Coomera catchment.
Yep. Can I ask, did we test that economics needs analysis at all, or have it reviewed or tested at all?
To you, Mr. Chair, no, we didn't. Obviously, if we needed to rely on that through relevant matters or a non-compliance with the scheme, we would have dubbed down further into that economic needs report. We're comfortable with the application.
So maybe, did we receive a submission from any existing medical centre or an existing practitioner in the area suggesting that it was going to undermine the viability of their medical centre?
To you, Mr. Chair, no, we didn't.
Right. And I think that would have been a fairly clear thing if we would have got that. My next question for now, so again, the specific outcomes 3.4.5.114D do not unduly detract from local character and amenity. In your explanation of this one before, from Roger and yourself, there was a lot of discussion about that being about the site cover and the size of the building. Built form was mentioned once, so I accept the site cover is definitely within the range, and I accept the size of the building is definitely smaller than others and looks like a small building. But I want to focus on built form, because to me built form is fairly important in establishing and maintaining local character. How was that assessed by officers, and does the built form have a bigger part to play than the site cover or the size of the building, given it's what everyone sees either driving past or walking past?
To Mr. Chair, I think the key provision is that commercial development is anticipated in suburban neighbourhoods. So we have to accept, or officers have accepted, that it will look like a commercial building. But if we get elements of landscape character and key elements that reflect what you would expect in a residential area, it responds well to the anticipated character.
So just for clarification or to pick up on that, so officers believe that their read of city plan anticipates buildings that look like commercial buildings, not a small scale use in the low density area.
To Mr. Chair, so it's a small scale commercial use, so we do consider that the city plan anticipates a commercial topology, and if we can get, as you mentioned, appropriate setbacks, appropriate site cover, appropriate height, well-balanced landscaping, it responds well.
It's funny because my read of city plan is that yes, we definitely anticipate it, and we anticipate it on a smaller scale and with setbacks and site covers that would fit in the low density area. But when I read it as that it should look like, or at least fit in with the zone it sits in, which is the low density area, which comes back to my first point of I believe this to be more about, I wonder if when this was written in the city plan, if the intent was to use the existing dwelling, not demolish a house and replace it with a glass front commercial building. Roger, you want to comment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the benchmarks are a bit limiting here. They just talk about setbacks and site cover. There's no specific benchmark that says the materials must match the adjoining properties. There's no conditions that says it has to be weatherboard or something. And I think that's the problem with officers responding to you, is that there's no specific benchmarks. The benchmarks are more about setbacks, site cover, landscaping. Just an observation, there will be a 1.8 metre high fence around the perimeter of the property, and it is a low set building. So in my opinion, with the landscaping, there's very little of the building that's going to be actually visible to adjoining properties, because it is a low set building, and with the 1.8 metre high fence that will screen the majority of the building from the view of external properties.
Other questions for officers? Councillor Curtis.
Thank you, and I'll just take the opportunity. Thank you so much for the work that you've done with my office and with the residents either side of this development throughout. But one of the questions that I didn't pick up on before coming in this morning that I did want to ask was about the solid waste management, because I note that we've got one 250 litre general waste bin and two 240-litre recycling bins. It strikes me that if we're going to have potentially 450 patients go through a week, where would the there would be a contaminated waste bin, or is that a separate provision normally under commercial operations with medical centres? How is that waste management dealt with?
Through you, Mr. Chair, you're right. So there's 3 bins provided at the rear: a general waste and 2 recycling, which complies with the Solid Waste Management Code. Kira and I took the opportunity to actually go to a healthcare services a couple of weeks ago that was under construction, and the doctor took us through to an internal storage room for clinical waste. And so through building code and their certification with a private certifier to get the classification for a medical centre, they need to have internal areas for the storage of waste. So on the plan there, you'd see sort of next to the treatment room, there's a little storage room. So I would assume that will be later where any clinical waste would be required.
follow-up to the waste question. So appreciating we only condition requirements for waste and recycling under this, and that, you know, if an office needed a Shred-X bin, we don't condition that. That's for them to work out. Same with medical waste. But it does raise a question of servicing of our bins in general, but also any other bins. What are the hours currently proposed that a service vehicle can come to the site of any description?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so the hours of operation for the use align with the hour of operation for servicing. So, yeah, between normal operating
So
hours.
there's not going to be a medical waste truck coming at 6 o'clock in the morning to collect their bin. It can only happen during 8 to 5:30.
To you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Yep. Right. Other questions? Was it Councillor Gates? Did I see your hand?
I'm going to save it for when I debate.
Understood. Any other questions, officers, before we get to that stage? I think we've probably exhausted questions from what I can see. In that case, so we have a recommendation from officers, but I know there's an interest in possibly changing that. So, Councillor Gates.
Yes, Chairman, if you would accept, I have passed on to the Minutes Secretary a changed recommendation, which is a refusal. And it's up on the screen. And if I have a seconder, I'll open, if you will accept that.
I just wouldn't mind checking first. Is there any, just because I know we have to be a bit more careful with refusal motions now, so just feedback from officers that they see no immediate concerns with format or anything that's raised in here?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our recommendation is as per the report.
Understand that part.
I mean, it's formatted in the right way, but I don't know if it's tested how they'll stand up.
Okay. So I have a proposed change recommendation from Councillor Gates. Is there someone wishing to second that? Councillor Martin.
Chairman, I'll foreshadow the officer's recommendation.
I have Councillor Peter Young as foreshadow the officer recommendation. thank you for that moment where we let our support staff just make sure everything's accurate on the screen. So we have a change recommendation move by Councillor Gates and seconded by Councillor Martin. Councillor Young has foreshadowed the officer recommendation. I'll move to Councillor Gates to open debate on her change recommendation.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I think everyone will recognise it's not my usual form. I don't usually disagree with what the officers propose for us. But on this one, I can't get past a few things in this report. The fact that it's not on the corner, the fact that it's not on a high-order road. If you go to page 45, it suggests the strategic framework requires that the development is low intensity with a scale that is cognizant of a dwelling house typology. That's not the case with this application. It's a brand new, shiny commercial development, and it also suggests that the proposal does not represent an out-of-centre development nor duplicate business. I can't accept that it doesn't do those things. I think regardless of the size of the building, the fact that there'll be 75 patients a day coming and going doesn't deem it to be a small-scale, low-key activity. It's a pretty busy operation that's intended, it seems, for this site. There's so much in it that troubles me in terms of the neighbourhood and the neighbouring properties in a low-density residential domain. I mean, I think most of us live in those circumstances, and you'd be heartbroken if right next door to you a development like this was approved by the council. Possibly, I don't know whether the neighbouring property owners were objectors, but I presume they would have been. And I feel that should have consideration. If we look on page 47 at the land uses section, it says the land use in the code should consist of a range of low intensity, low rise, predominantly detached housing that retains and enhances local character and amenity. I can't see that this does that, nor can I see that it doesn't detract from the residential amenity of the area. And so for those reasons, and I thank the officers for helping me a little, and Councillor Curtis with inquiries over the last few days so that a refusal can be formed. It's just my view that we have the provisions of City Plan to protect our communities, and despite the fact that this has been reduced in scale and intensity, there's no assurances that that will be the final result. And we've seen it frequently over recent times where minor change applications are submitted immediately, council approves something, and we seem to have little or no success in stopping those changes from becoming a reality. And it certainly is at its maximum at this point in time. I believe there are problems with the car parking. It's just not going to be that everyone gets there at exactly the right time and leaves in time for the next patient to arrive. So for those reasons, I feel that this is inappropriate in this location. And in talking to Councillor Curtis just yesterday, there's a commercial operation just a couple of doors down the road that's for sale. I mean, on a corner, which would be code accessible. I can't imagine why someone would go down the path of an impact accessible application at what I consider to be a location that's undesirable for the neighbourhood, when the city plan is established in order to make sure that these things go in the right location. So that's all I've got.
Anyone wishing to speak against the changed recommendation? Councillor Peter Young.
Thanks, Chairman. I've been really grappling with this one because seemingly it's a very inoffensive thing that's going to meet a local need, but there is obviously great concern and genuine concern about the possible impacts. Ultimately, I'm driven to support the officer's recommendation because I think it's been achieved over a long period of hard work, and it presents to us an outcome that is measurable, containable, and lawful. And I'm concerned that these reasons won't stack up. It might seem like a good outcome for us to refuse it, but ultimately I don't think it would withstand a legal challenge should that arise. Essentially, the building attempts have been made to soften the look of the building with landscaping and to present a less than fully commercial sort of outlet to the street. By comparison, the character of the street is pretty undesirable from my point of view, just a series of brick walls and solid steel fences. It doesn't present all that well, and if anything, this might embellish that local area through the provision of some landscaping and so forth. I was concerned about the intensity of the use and the number of staff and patrons or clients who might be there at any one time, but I think that all measures that have been identified by the officers in their recommendations will achieve a pretty good level of control of that. I've had concerns about this and the propensity for other commercial developments to follow in that locality. We've seen that, for example, Ashmore Road, where a whole series of former houses have now been turned into studios and dentists and all sorts of professional outlets, and it's not what was envisaged, but that really is a higher order road and attracts a lot of people in its own right. I don't think that this road in this location will see the same proliferation of commercial outlets. I think this is a one-off. There's a few others along there. There's a nursery north of it. There's a school, there's a childcare centre and so forth scattered along that road. And I just don't think these reasons are strong enough to attract my vote. Thanks, Chair.
Speaker for the change recommendation. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I'd echo the comments Councillor Gates made, but a key concern I have with this one was the landscaping plan, because I think that certainly softens the streetscape. I can't really get past the plan that has the smaller trees in the key locations that would soften it, but the large trees, I mean, the smaller trees grow to 4 to 5 metres, but the large trees proposed on the boundary would go to 8 to 10 metres, potentially up to 25. I think that simply just would remove sunlight for the southern neighbours, create maintenance problems. I understand the neighbours could trim it heavily back, but I think that just is an unworkable solution. So I would naturally think that that could be reworked into the main areas. Perhaps, you know, there was islands with large trees to soften it, or maybe the large tree could be right in front of the building. But I simply think that that would then create an undersupply of car parking. So I think for the landscaping and the parking plan, they're the key reasons why I'm supporting the change recommendation.
Speaker against? In that case, I'm just going to, sorry, Councillor O'Neill, were you looking? So I'm going to speak against, which I got to admit, after hearing the presentation today and hearing the questions and debate between councillors, it's right on the edge for me of that way. But while I would have been supportive of possibly amending a couple conditions in an approval to change the look of the building and possibly increase the landscaping or change the landscaping, I don't think I can support this particular refusal motion, which is where we get to with it. So if the change recommendation doesn't happen to get up and we get to the officer's recommendation, I would be looking to do some work with the officer recommendation on a couple conditions. So I can't support an outright refusal because I believe that some missing things in the framework of the city plan have left officers in a rather difficult position, that their assessment against city plan is correct, that that assessment is there, that it's a failure of city plan to have provided some more guidance through steps in the framework to have allowed officers to maybe push back on some things. The built form is a great one. I read the city plan and think the intent should have been for the buildings to look like other ones in it, that it should have been a repurpose of an existing dwelling. Because there's nothing in city plan for officers to assess against or to push back on, that's difficult. So I won't be supporting Councillor Gates' change recommendation, but do just put out there that if not successful and we come back to the foreshadowed officer recommendation, I'll be seeking to change a couple of things there. Speaker for the change recommendation, Councillor Patterson.
It's been interesting hearing from the people who are against, who've almost persuaded me more about why I'm for this recommendation. I do think that there perhaps needed to be a little bit more creativity with this once it was identified that the original proposal wasn't acceptable, and that I think of medical clinics like this that do work on very busy roads in Southport, and they do keep that front face of a residential look and take advantage of parking in behind. I think given there was a recognition that it was oversized, not taking that opportunity to reduce the site cover, which would have enabled better landscaping, better parking and more of a residential fit, means that I can't be supporting this application today. The numbers don't stack up. Numbers don't stack up. 75 people. So if you think about it, it does not make sense if the doctors were able to organise their time in the most efficient manner. It still doesn't stack up. Those car parks will not meet those requirements. So I won't. Yes, I'll be supporting this change recommendation today.
Speaker against. I offer the floor to anyone who wishes to speak at all. In that case, Councillor, I just offered the floor to anyone wishing to speak. Councillor Gates, in that case, we'd come back to you to close.
Thanks, Chair. My biggest problem here is the strategic framework, which you just spoke to, because the officers have suggested that this proposal supports and promotes the strategic framework for the following reason: because the development is low intensity, low rise, with a scale that is cognizant of a dwelling house typology. I just can't get past the fact that it doesn't look like a dwelling house at all, and it is not consistent with the dwelling house character applicable to the zone. It's a brand new shiny building for a commercial operation next to two low density homes where, you know, I see one's got a swimming pool next door. It's their home. And I bet they'd never anticipated, because of city plan, where we stipulate that our preference is for them to be on a corner, these type of operations, or on high order roads, and this is neither of those things. So you wouldn't buy a home thinking that there was a possibility of this occurring. You know, the home's most people's major investment in their life. With regard to the presentation to the street, it's concrete, it's the car park area, so it doesn't actually meet the requirement not to detract from the residential amenity of the area, in my view. It doesn't enhance the local character by maintaining the residential appearance of a property. For all those reasons, and for the fact that the hours of operation and the number of proposed patients seems to me unachievable. I just think we're going to end up with another compliance issue in one way or another that we don't need if we just stick to city plan and do what's anticipated in an area. And I do feel for the officers that they've gone to great lengths to try and get the scale of this reduced to a level that it might be acceptable, but I just can't get past the local character and amenity of the area, and I put myself in the position of those people who are living next door, and you'd be absolutely gutted if this happened right next door to your home.
Debate is closed. We'll take the vote. We'll do division since we have a change recommendation of refusal. So all those in favour of the change recommendation: Councillor Fowler, Councillor Gates, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Martin, Councillor Doran, Councillor O'Neill. Against: Councillor Hamill and Councillor Young. The change recommendation is successful. Councillors, is there any general business items to be raised? In that case, I thank city officers for their time today, thank our support staff, and to all councillors. We have a little bit of time today. That's already been dealt with. Yep, we have a little bit of time today, so if any of you are available, coffee on me across the road. Meeting closed, 10:36.